Hello, everyone. This week, we're all marking the 105th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide in a very uh, different and strange way because we are all confined to our homes due to the COVID-19 outbreak and our way of trying to contain that. However, that doesn't mean that that commemoration will not happen. Today, my guest is Representative Adam Schiff, who's joining me from Washington, where he is trying to self isolate. Congressman, welcome. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Ara. It's good to be with you.
Uh, let's start off by talking about COVID-19 and what some of the things Congress is doing. We all know about the CARES Act, but there seems to be some movement on your end to bring more aid to the American people.
Yes, I'm here in Washington because we have a vote tomorrow, and I also need to periodically go into my secure space in the Capitol to
Mhm.
work on classified materials for the Intelligence Committee. But tomorrow we expect to vote on a couple things. We expect to vote on replenishing the small business fund so that more small businesses can participate. We're also trying to address some of the problems with that program where small businesses, the smaller small businesses, are running into difficulty at large financial institutions. The banks, some of the big banks are giving preference to their bigger customers, which was really not the intent of the program. And so we're earmarking a certain amount of these additional 300 billion in small business funds to smaller lending institutions, community-based lending institutions. That's not going to solve the entire problem because some small business customers of big banks aren't still going to have to be beholden to those big banks. So we're going to need to do more, but we are putting more money in the program. We're also spending 75 billion more to help our hospitals and in our community, like communities all across America. Hospitals are really struggling right now. A lot of them have canceled their elective surgeries, so they're struggling financially as well as trying to cope with the pandemic, get a hold of protective gear, get the tests done and the results of tests, protect their staff and workers. So we have 75 billion to help our healthcare system. We have 25 billion in the measure tomorrow to expand testing, and this is really essential. There's no way to reopen the economy unless we can have many, many times more people tested than we've currently the capacity to do. We really should be conducting millions of tests, not hundreds of thousands of tests, because we need to know where the virus is. In Los Angeles, there was a study done by USC recently. Stanford did a similar study in Northern California. And apparently, the virus is much more widespread in our community than we know. That's the bad news. The good news is it may not be as lethal as was expected. Many people are simply asymptomatic. But that underscores the necessity of testing so we know really where the virus is, how widespread it is, how to contain it, mitigate it. And so there's important new funding in the bill for testing, about 25 billion for testing. So these are some of the elements of the bill. It's just an interim package. We know we're going to have to do an awful lot more. And I'm supporting, frankly, a very broad approach that would have the federal government guarantee salary for and payroll for all businesses, large and small, and have it go through the IRS rather than through banks. It's more efficient, more effective, I think more equitable, doesn't let the banks or the administration pick winners and losers. So that's something I've been pushing for and will continue to push for. One final note, I'm very proud that I was able to get in the last legislation provision for many people in our community who work in non-traditional employment. They're gig workers, they're freelancers, many of them in the entertainment industry. They work job to job, contract to contract, sometimes commercial to commercial. They would be left out of unemployment compensation, but I work to make sure they would be included, and they are. So that's very important for Los Angelinos.
Mhm. Congressman, certainly the surge in unemployment, this dramatic surge in unemployment, has caused a kind of a backlog in our efficiency of how to address unemployment concerns, small business loans. How should that be addressed? Is this a federal issue, or is this local states and counties that need to provide more manpower in those offices?
It's both, and it's one of the reasons why I like a broad approach at the federal level of guaranteeing payroll. The best way not to inundate the unemployment system is not to have so many people unemployed. If you can keep people on payroll, even if they can't show up for work, and even if they can't do their job through telework, but you can keep them employed and getting their paycheck, they don't need to go on unemployment compensation. And so the more that we can address these other challenges in the economy, the more it doesn't put all the reliance on the unemployment system. But for those that do need it right now, that needs to work. And it's part of the reason why many of us fought in this interim package, although I have to say without success, to have more funding for the states. The states are crying out for help right now. And it will compound problems if the states don't have the resources to process unemployment, or they don't have the resources to keep their health care or their emergency providers working. So the states and cities really need additional help too. We don't want the states and cities laying their people off and contributing to the problem rather than the solution. So we fought, although unsuccessfully, to include more money for states and cities. In this bill, there was very strong opposition by Mitch McConnell and the president. The president says that he will support it in the next package. But I have to say, Mitch McConnell is saying there may not be a next package for quite some time, although we are going to be pushing the Congress to address these problems ASAP.
Well, we'll be following the news on that. And of course, the COVID-19 issue is a global crisis, and it has impacted Armenia as well. What are your thoughts about reprogramming the already existing package to Armenia to be put forth for COVID-19 relief efforts over there?
I strongly support it, and there are a couple of things going on with respect to support for Armenia during this crisis. The first is that USAID has committed $1.1 million to help Armenia meet the needs of its people during this COVID pandemic. But we're also working with the Armenian community. I joined a letter with, I think, about 75 of my colleagues in Congress to the State Department urging that Armenia be allowed to reprogram funds that were earmarked, for example, for democracy assistance to deal with the pandemic. And there's some early indications now from the State Department that they will be allowed to do so. I think they are seeking guidance from the U.S. Embassy in Yerevan about how that can be accomplished. So thank you to the community for weighing in on that. That's, I think, going to be important in Armenia as well as other countries that we provide financial support to.
And is the reason that, for example, the EU from the onset said we're going to give 51 million euros and then they upped that to a more robust package. Is there a reason that the United States has been smaller in its assistance to the international community?
Well, to be candid, there has been a hostility by this administration to foreign aid. There's been a hostility to international organizations. You see the president talking about cutting funding or halting funding to the WHO, the World Health Organization. There are issues with the WHO, undoubtedly. One of the issues, frankly, with the WHO is the administration refused to appoint the U.S. person to the executive board of the WHO, so we didn't have as much influence there as we should have. But nonetheless, these global organizations, health organizations, are going to be really important in the global struggle against this pandemic. If this pandemic is teaching us anything, it is that we are not an island, that we can't wall ourselves off from the rest of the world. Cutting off flights to China may be useful, but it doesn't help the fact when the virus is already here and when there are broad exceptions to that policy that allow other people to come with the virus. So we have to have, I think, an approach that is both very local in the United States, but also recognizes this is a global threat. And it's one that's going to persist for some time. The head of the CDC said yesterday that what happens in the winter, the coming winter, may even more tax our healthcare system than what we've been through. because it will coincide with the regular flu season. In a regular flu season, sometimes our hospitals are inundated with patients suffering respiratory and other complications of the ordinary flu. When you have both the COVID virus and the ordinary flu at the same time, it's going to put a lot of strain on our resources. Even if we do things really well in this country, if other countries don't or don't get the help they need, it will be very difficult for us to wall the problem off here. So this really requires American leadership at the national level for Americans. It requires American leadership at the international level as well.
I have to ask, the president's order to halt immigration, how is that going to impact people who are already, for example, in line to receive green cards or their interviews? Is that going to have some kind of a adverse effect on that universe of individuals?
It's really too early to say because, like so many of the immigration announcements, whether it was the Muslim ban when that was rolled out or other things, they're often announced before they're well thought out. The president yesterday at his conference said that he wasn't going to be precluding people who are coming into the country to work on farms, and that it wouldn't affect people who were seeking temporary visas, only people seeking to immigrate. That suggests that this is not a health policy. Initially, I think it was represented to be something to prevent the country from people with COVID. But the president, I think, made clear, whether intended to or not, that no, this isn't about health. This is an economic issue. After all, having people come into the country to work on farms, you can't distinguish from other people coming into the country in terms of whether they might have the virus or not. The reality is that we need to have good protections in place in terms of our healthcare system and a way to monitor the health of those coming into the country. We have to have a reasonable plan in terms of isolation of people coming into the country if that's necessary. But announcing wholesale new policies to advance political agendas that are separate and apart from this pandemic, this is not the time to be doing that in an effort to score political points or some other purpose.
Mm-hmm. It is an issue that concerns some people in our community, and we will be following this very carefully. But yesterday I had a chat with the Halo Trust program director in Stepanakert, Nagorno-Karabakh, who is saying that the organization has put forth certain elements for COVID-19, but we all know that so the deminers can be safe in continuing their program. But we all know that the U.S. funding for that ended this year. What are some things that we can do to ensure that that funding stays for that important humanitarian effort?
Well, Ara, as you know, I've been a long-time supporter and champion of the demining effort in Artsakh and a big supporter of the Halo Trust, which has done remarkable work. I think they have removed about 250,000 mines or other explosive ordnance over the course of their work, and they're just tremendous. And tragically, some of them have lost their lives performing this service. There is more work to be done. There is more surveying to be done to determine other areas that may contain mines. We still have people injured and killed by these mines. It's not the time to be ending the effort. Now, every year it seems like we have to fight all over again to support this demining effort. The administration, the State Department, and I will say in fairness, not just this administration, we had these challenges with the last administration. They have often frowned on any kind of funding for Artsakh because they don't want to alienate Azerbaijan. Now, that's a pretty awful reason, in my view, not to try to meet the humanitarian needs of the people of Artsakh. So on a bipartisan basis, each year where the administration has defunded the mining effort, we have been successful in putting money back in for the mining effort. I hope and believe we can be successful again. Now, just because we're confined to quarters in terms of citizens around the country doesn't mean that your viewers can't be engaged and involved. You can, by emailing, by video conferencing, by reaching out and calling, and advocating for this additional funding that's so important.
Uh, just last week, Artsakh had a runoff presidential elections, which completed the package of parliamentary and presidential elections that kicked off in March. You were one of several members of Congress who congratulated the new president-elect. How do you think these elections work? Moving forward, as far as the peace process is concerned, as far as the development of Artsakh as an economy, as a society is concerned?
Well, in the initial election in Artsakh, the voter turnout was in excess of 70%. I think it was about 72 or more percent of the residents turned out to vote. That's an extraordinary number. I wish we could get to that level of participation in the United States. Now, in the runoff, the turnout was less. It was in the 40s. And I have to think that the difference between the initial election and the runoff was the progress of the pandemic and people being concerned about the health risks of going out to a polling place. And frankly, that's something that we need to keep in mind about this fall. It's one of the reasons why I believe every American should have the opportunity to vote by mail in November. They have the choice to go to the polling place, but they should be able to vote by mail. We should make that easy and not force people, as was the case in Wisconsin recently, to choose their health or their franchise, their vote. But it was a very impressive showing in Artsakh. Democracies around the world should applaud that. Instead, you see often the usual kind of reaction. Well, we don't want to attribute that much significance to this, but look, Artsakh has obviously a key role to play in the Minsk process and the resolution of the conflict there, and their representatives are permitted to participate. They can't do that if they don't have representatives, and the representatives won't be representative if there's not a mechanism through elections to be able to choose them. So the people of Artsakh did exactly what they should do. We need to do what we should do, which is support democracy and self-determination for the people of Artsakh.
It's a little bit surprising to see the United States being part of, as a co-chair of the OSCE Minsk group that is mediating the whole peace process, kind of signing its name on a statement that says that these elections don't matter. I mean, our country has been founded on the principles of democracy, but here it is, its representative saying that the fact that people are trying to determine for themselves their future doesn't matter. How can we change that approach as it comes to the peace process?
This is, I think, a grave disservice when our representatives speak this way. And we've had this problem for some time when there would be violence along the line of contact, when Azerbaijani snipers would shoot and kill Armenians, including civilians and young people. What we would get out of sometimes the U.S. representative to the Minsk group would be statements like, we call on both sides to refrain from violence. Well, of course we want both sides to refrain from violence, but when you make those kind of morally relativistic statements, when there's one party responsible, then you just encourage more of that kind of deadly and malignant conduct. If Azerbaijan knows that they can commit these acts and will not be sanctioned for it, will not be called out for it, then there's no discouragement, no deterrence to further aggression. So, I think that these statements by the U.S. representative don't represent the values of democracy to the degree they down-talk the importance of elections. And also, I think they prolong the conflict there. Now, look, I have to admit to having very cynical views of the good faith of the Russians and their participation in this. They, not only in this region, but in so many others, whether it's Ossetia or Chechnya or Georgia or elsewhere, they like these frozen conflicts because it means that Armenia becomes dependent on Russia, Azerbaijan becomes dependent on Russia. So I don't think Russia has a particular incentive to resolve this. We should be the party actively working to resolve this. And I think unless we're willing to take a position and advocate for our values, we're not going to be able to advance the peace there.
Congressman, last fall we saw the majority of the House, the great majority of the House of Representatives, and of course a unanimous vote by the Senate, finally recognizing the Armenian genocide. And a lot of it has been through your effort in your 20 years in Congress. You have shepherded and spearheaded this movement. We had an opportunity to come together and thank you. But moving forward, what should be the congressional agenda on the matter of the Armenian genocide, especially this year that we were looking to kind of mark the 105th anniversary with this great victory in the U.S. legislature, but unfortunately the virus is stopping us. But what should we do moving forward?
Ara, I can't tell you how thrilled I was that we finally succeeded in passing the Genocide Resolution, and by such a overwhelming and bipartisan vote, 405 votes in favor in the House of Representatives of the resolution I introduced. And in the Senate, it was a unanimous vote, unanimous consent vote. And of course, that hasn't happened in decades. It was always my hope that we could do so while there were still survivors among us. And I think we accomplished that, but barely. There are very few still left. But look, this was the work of advocates like yourself and the grassroots in the United States for decades. And I salute all of you that were involved in that struggle for never giving up on the U.S. Congress, never failing to work hard year after year after year, disappointment after disappointment until we succeeded. Now that we've succeeded in Congress, I think there are a few next steps. First, we need to make sure we get the administration to make its own acknowledgement. And there are concerns, candidly, in the Congress and I think in the community that the president's close relationship with Erdogan or his business interests in Turkey may thwart an administrative statement of recognition. But I hope that's not the case, and we'll work toward making that happen. It's also important that this become a regular recognition every session of Congress. And so we can't presume that's the case even with a vote as strong as we had. I think it really helps us a great deal. It's going to be very hard for members who voted to support this last year to come in next year and say, well, I didn't mean it when I voted in favor of it before. But we can't take anything for granted. And I also think we need to move forward towards justice, restitution, reparations, and that ought to be the next strategic goal. But let's not lose this opportunity, even if we have to do it at a distance, to savor the success we had in the past year. And I know many of us will be commemorating with candles in our windows and in virtual marches and assemblies, commemorating those who were lost as well as the progress we made this year.
Every year you have a unique way of commemorating the Armenian genocide on the floor of the Congress. There was that moment where you read out some of the names of the survivors. You came on another year speaking in Armenian. With this situation right now, what are your plans to mark the genocide? And certainly you've been along our marches every year, so this year is a little bit different.
It is quite a bit different this year, and I think it's going to be a unique commemoration for all of us. I look forward to joining in a lot of the virtual commemorations that organizations are hosting. And I'm proud to have a candle in our window as part of the vigil. And I like the thought of candles in windows all over the country, indeed all over the world. As a way of making a powerful statement that we may be separated from each other, but we're united in our determination to fight genocide. So I'll look forward to the new and different ways that we commemorate the genocide this year, and also look forward to the day when we can do so and march into the streets of Los Angeles once again. And I have the opportunity on the House floor to commemorate with my colleagues.
We are all hoping for that day that we can come together and actually see each other. Congressman, before we leave, do you have any last thoughts?
Thank you. First of all, I really appreciate, Ara, you inviting me on today. And I just want to say to the community how proud I am to represent you, but also that I know what a trying time this is for everyone, how much worry there is over people's jobs, their livelihoods, their family, their health. We are going to get through this. And what we do now, in terms of following the science and the recommendations of healthcare experts to keep our distance from each other, is going to save lives and protect our family. So this too shall pass, and I look forward to seeing everybody, as I like to say, on the other side of the curve.
Thank you, Congressman. Please, you and your family stay safe, and we'll be watching what Congress is doing. Take care of yourself. Thank you.
You too. Thank you, Ara.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please keep in mind the guidelines set by the city, county, and the state for social distancing to avoid the spread of the coronavirus, and have a great day. Thank you.